Hello and welcome back to Bicycle Legs Talks Music and another special episode. And can you please welcome back to the channel Mr. Tom Curless from Curlessmania. Tom, pleasure to have you back on the channel.
So nice to be here, Bicycle Legs. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for this one.
And today, what we're going to be doing is I'm going to be taking a bit of a leaf out of Tom's book here, and we're going to do a little bit of an album battle. And today, we're going to be looking at three David Bowie albums. People who've followed the channel for a little while may know I do a David Bowie video every January in honor of his birth and his death. And today we're going to be looking at the Berlin Trilogy. So that is Low, Heroes, and Lodger. Three wonderful albums. A bit of a misnomer. I've got to say right from the get-go, the Berlin Trilogy is a bit of a misnomer, isn't it, Tom? Because only Heroes was completely recorded in Berlin.
That is
Um,
correct.
you
Yes,
know,
yes.
Low was
Most of
partly
Low
re
was Switzerland, right? Yeah.
well, most of Low I think was recorded in France at the Chateau de Hérouville,
Oh, okay,
and
France. Got it.
Lodger was recorded in Switzerland in Montreux.
Okay, okay. Got
So,
to mix. Yep.
but I think they called the Berlin trilogy just because David was kind of based out of Berlin for that sort of few years that these albums were made.
Hmm.
So,
Yes.
when
Yes.
did you first come across the Berlin trilogy?
I think like most people, I came across it later. I was my first introduction to Bowie was Ziggy Stardust, and I my older sister had the record, and so and she had and Diamond Dogs as well. So those two were my first introduction to David Bowie, and I was always very an acolyte of the early David Bowie, the glam Bowie, right? And then of course, and then I loved those records to death, and then so I became a fan, and then of course Let's Dance came out when I was like 12, 13 or 14 or something, and and I loved that record as well. That was a huge album. And so then I became even more of a fan, and I really started wanting to have just explore the whole discography. And but it took me a while to get to the Berlin trilogy. I knew of it, but I was always told it was kind of different and weird. And I was, when you're younger, you're like, oh, I kind of want to rock. I don't really want to be ambient. I don't want to, I heard a lot of strange things about it, and I thought, I don't know if it's going to be for me. But then finally I got to it, and when I got to it, wow, it blew me away.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
I
completely.
mean, my story is pretty similar. I like the two albums that I owned as a youngster of Bowie's were Ziggy Stardust and Scary Monsters,
Mhm.
and they're still my two favorite Bowie albums to this day. It's funny how that happens. You know, the albums you knew as a kid always tend to be the ones that stick with you. But
Mhm.
and of course Let's Dance, huge hit when I would have been 12, I think, when that came out. It was 1983. So,
Mhm.
I mean, and that was, completely different Bowie, but really, really great. And we loved that album.
Mhm.
Yeah, it would have been later. I would have been late teens, early 20s that I really started exploring the rest of the catalog and getting into these albums. By this stage, I was sort of familiar with Brian Eno for his work with Roxy Music and his production work with Devo and Talking Heads and stuff like that. So, that's kind of where I sort of knew Brian Eno from. So,
Mhm.
so let's get into it. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about each of the three albums. We're not going to go through every album, every track, because we'd be here all day if we did that. So we're just going to talk about each album and, what are our highlights? What do we think? How do they compare with each other and that sort of thing. At the end of the show, what we're going to do is we're going to do a little mini ranking. We're going to give our three, two, and one of the Berlin trilogy to see how we both feel about these albums and which ones we think are just a little bit better than the others. So we start off, of course, with this album, Low. Beautiful album cover. Have you ever noticed, Tom, that the album cover is actually a pun because
No.
he's it's a sideways picture of Bowie on that. and it says low just above it. So it's low profile.
Ah, got it. Got it. I never knew that. I'm learning something new today.
Yeah.
There you
So,
go. And isn't
you
it a
know,
still from Man Who Fell to Earth?
yes, it is. But I
Yes.
think, just that idea of low profile is a little bit what Bowie was going for with this album. I think he was trying to sort of retreat a little bit from the spotlight,
Hmm.
retreat a little bit from, commerciality. I would argue that that started with the album before, with Station to
Yes.
Station, very much a transitional album, Station to Station, because it's got bits that still have that Young Americans feel to it, that plastic soul and all that sort of thing. But then you've got the title track, Station to Station, which is very much pointing in the direction of where he would go with the Berlin trilogy.
Absolutely. And I think David he does that a lot. He'll leave little crumbs as to where he's going next on a lot of records.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, how do you feel about this album? Like, what are your highlights and like had, just what are your sort of overall impressions of this album?
Um, it took me a minute to get into this. I'll be honest, it took me a second to get into this, but once it hit me like a Mac truck. I mean, it was just unbelievable. I love this record. I'm giving it away, but I love this album.
Hmm.
I just think it's such a statement. I mean, it's so I mean, I think he was going through sort of a darker time in his life. He was trying to get out. I mean, the backstory a little bit was that he was in Los Angeles and he was doing way too much cocaine and he was getting cocaine psychosis and he was really just deep into the rock and roll lifestyle and it was very unhealthy for him. And apparently he wasn't eating. He was like drinking milk and staying up until all hours and not really sleeping and he's still making great music, to your point. I mean, Station to Station is one of my all-time favorite Bowie records.
Hmm.
Um, but that from all the reports, he was very unhealthy at that time, and he really, to your as you said, the low profile thing. He wanted to back off from all of his image. He had been working hard at this sort of putting on characters for what 7 years or something like that. He'd been working hard at it, and I think he was kind of done with that, and he wanted to get back to just being David Bowie again.
Yeah.
And and he really changed everything. He decided to scale everything back. And this album, it just when you listen to it, it's the soundtrack to that. And there's a little bit of things like when he says something about be what does he say? Blue light, the blue. What is it? Break it
Blue,
or
blue, electric blue. Yeah.
like yes. Um, apparently this is like that song is I can't which song is that? That
That's
is it Sound and
Sound of
Vision?
Vision. Yeah.
Yeah, Sound and
Yeah.
Vision, where he's kind of talking about. I guess he did have a blue light at one time, and he was in a room, and he was just by himself, and he was having a tough time, and it's kind of soundtracking that difficult time he was having. But I just think it's just getting back to the music part of it. I just think his band is excellent on this. I think the rhythm section is very funky. I think he's got was it Dennis Davis on drums?
Yeah.
Who's just a fantastic drummer, and and then he's got Tony Visconti producing, and then it's interesting that I'm going all over the place, but there's so much to talk about with this record.
Mm,
Is
mm,
that
mm.
apparently this started as he was going to write the soundtrack to Man Who Fell to Earth. He assumed that he was going to be doing the music to that movie, and he started writing these ambient pieces. And I think that's how it started with things like Art Decade and Weeping Wall, and things like that. And because those sound like soundtrack pieces, and I think those it started with that, and then he kind of moved into more of the upbeat, kind of more rocking tracks on the first side. Um, but I just I know I'm going all over the place with this, but it's just I love this album and I love how it's broken up into the first side and the second side. I know a lot of people don't like that. I think it's great. I think it really works very well on this record.
Mm.
What's your take on Low? What do you think of Low?
Yeah. I mean, I love this record too. And I love the fact that you get two completely different sides. I mean, on side one, you've got these shorter pieces, they're up tempo. The drum sound on this album, my goodness, I love the drum sound on this album.
Oh God,
Um,
yeah.
you know, and and it's something like that drum sound wouldn't even extend into the next couple of Berlin Trilogy albums. I don't know why it was
Right.
just this album that had that really walloping sort of, and it sort of has this view kind of sound
Sort of
on the
decays. Yeah,
snare.
decay. Yes.
Um, and you've got Eno doing his little treatments on everything and all that sort of thing.
Mhm.
Um, Especially, a track like What in the World. That song is just, it's buzzing. It's almost like, there's like insects in the background. You know,
Yes.
and
Yes.
I love all this creativity with the sound design on these songs. And none of these songs outstay their welcome. Of all these songs on side one, the longest one is always crashing the same car, and it's 3 minutes 26.
Yes.
You
Right.
know, I
Yes.
mean, Breaking Glass isn't even 2 minutes long, and I love that song.
Oh, I love it.
Um,
I love that.
you know, Be My Wife is great, new career in a new town. You do have instrumentals on this side too. Speed of Life and A New Career in a New Town are both instrumental, but they're
Hmm.
up-tempo instrumental. They've still got all the drums and the bass and, that wonderful rhythm section, as you say. Great
Hmm.
rhythm guitar from Carlos Alomar, you know. I feel like he
Yes.
was the glue of this band, Carlos, because he would just, he wasn't a flashy guitarist, he wasn't a lead guitarist, but he was a
Hmm.
great, he was basically Bowie's musical director, on the tours that would follow.
Hmm.
So,
Yes.
Bowie obviously relied on him quite a bit.
Hmm.
But then you get these four more lengthy, not completely instrumental tracks on side two, but they are very ambient. And when there are vocals, they're either wordless vocals or they're vocals in sort of like a made up language.
Yes. Yes. Yep.
And, Wazawa, co-written by Eno. I loved it. You know, at this stage, I mean, Bowie invited Eno to be part of this project because his favorite record around this time was Eno's Discreet Music,
Yes.
which was
Yep.
Eno's first uh, fully ambient record.
Hmm.
And it's a wonderful, if you're into ambient music, find Discreet Music and do yourself a favor because it's one of the best ambient albums I think that have ever been recorded.
It's
But
excellent.
but yeah, you get these wonderful moody drumless. There's no drums on side two of this record. There's a
No.
little in Art Decade, there's a little bit of like rhythm machine, like very
Like a loop
primitive drum.
almost. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
very, very primitive drum machine.
But it's kind
Um,
of in the background. It's not really very
yeah,
prominent. Yeah.
absolutely. I think on the credits, if I can just pull them out, um, it's credited to Bowie as prearranged percussion.
That's great.
So yeah, I mean, Bowie's playing a lot of instruments on side too, as well. People sort of
Yes.
don't sort of think of Bowie as an instrumentalist, or if they do, they think of him playing the sax on some of his records and that sort of thing. But he was a really good keyboard player and he was a decent guitar player as well. And, he contributes a lot of the instrumentation, particularly on side two. On side two, a lot of the instrumentation's just him and Eno. It's only, I think, on Subterraneans that you get a couple of other people sort of joining in. But
Yes.
but
Yes.
yeah, I
Yep.
love the fact that this album has two very distinct sides. I mean, I can understand why it might put some people off, but to me, it's one of the strengths of this record.
Hmm. No, I love it too. I think it's great. I think it's because it really has a flow for each side. And
Yeah.
I have to say that first of all, I wanted to mention that I do love the wordless vocals. I love when he does
Mm,
that. And I love that he plays sax on a lot of this. And I'm not usually a saxophone guy, but I love when Bowie plays sax. I don't know why,
mm.
but something about the way he plays. always gets me, and I just think it's so unique. Um, and I have to tell you, I dropped my wife off at the airport tonight. She was going for work. She had to leave, the airport for us is about an hour away. So I dropped her off, and then on the way back, right before this call, I cranked up side two of Low just really loud, and it was my soundtrack all the way home, and it was just I was literally in a trance. I mean, it put me in this sort of beautiful trance, that, and
Mm.
it's that I love. Is it Warzawa where it does
Yeah.
the one note, dun dun
Mm.
dun, du, 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 and it gets you in this mood. It's like it's such a mood thing. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Loved it.
No, it is wonderful. Important thing to note with this album too is that the record company were not thrilled when they first heard this record, and I think they didn't
Oh,
actually want to put it out. They thought it wasn't going to sell anything, all that sort of thing. Bowie had the last laugh though, because Sound and Vision was a big, big hit for him. So,
yeah. Yeah, it didn't. I think it sold like 300,000 copies, like right out of the gate or something, and they were like, "Oh
mm,
my God!" Like they thought it was going to flop, and it was. I think it was just he had so much momentum at that point, that anything he put out was going to sell a decent amount. And honestly, I can see where a record company would listen to this and say, "Oh, what? Oh my, this isn't Young Americans. Like, what is
mm.
this?" You know, I
Yeah,
could see them
absolutely.
very scared. Yeah.
I mean, even with Station to Station, you had the title track that was 10 minutes long, was quite, influenced by krautrock and all that sort of thing, and not very commercial and all that sort of thing. But then you had immediately after that, you have Golden Years,
Golden Years.
which is
Yeah,
just
yeah.
like, really,
That's a
really
hit.
good track. Yeah, it's a hit song right from the moment you hear it.
Right, right.
So I don't
Yeah.
think they heard a hit on this album, and yet Sound and Vision was a big hit for him. So,
Yeah. Yeah, no, I also want to mention before I forget that I believe that Speed of Life fades in. And I think
mm,
that they said that Speed of Life fades in, and then the last, then it fades out. The last song fades out. So it kind of feels like you're walking into a room and you experience this and then you walk out. I just love that feeling,
yeah,
you know.
absolutely. So yeah,
It's great.
in the very same year, I mean, in 1977, he not only released this, he was involved with two records with Iggy Pop, with The Idiot and Lust for Life. Both really, really good albums too, as he goes and grabs them.
Yes. At least one of them. Yeah.
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 And then he still had time to do this. This is my very beat up copy of
Oh,
Heroes.
wow. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Yours is in much nicer nick.
Yeah,
Um,
yes. I bought this not too long ago. Yes.
yeah, this is original Australian pressing, but as you can see, it's had like a sticker on it or something. And
I love it
but
though. It's an original.
it's got character. Yeah, so I like that about vintage records. Sometimes the covers are a little beat up and they've got a bit of character.
Yeah. Yeah.
This one starts to meddle with the formula of Low a little bit, doesn't it? Like,
Yes.
it's not strictly one side of songs, one side of ambient. It mixes it up a little bit.
Yes. Yes. Agreed. This one, I always say Heroes feels a little bit more playful um
Mm,
than than Low. It feels like he's coming out of his dark period and he's starting to I don't know. There's still that very artsy a take on things, but it has a little more playful vibe to it, I think.
yeah, absolutely. And of course, with this album too, we get the secret sauce that is Robert Fripp being added.
Yes, of course. Of course.
Um,
Yes.
Robert Fripp is on record as saying that Bowie called him up and asked him if he wanted to come over and play, and I quote, some hairy rock and roll guitar.
I've seen that
Um,
interview.
yeah. And
Yeah.
um, and Robert Fripp hadn't picked up a guitar for about 2.5 years because after King Crimson, he went off to do this sort of like alternative education kind of thing. Um,
Yeah. Hmm.
Learning, um, under J.G. Bennett and all this sort of stuff. And he'd completely taken himself out of the music business. So he hadn't picked up a guitar in about 2.5 years when David Bowie and Brian Eno invited him to come and work on Heroes. And apparently, the first thing he played is what you hear on Beauty and the Beast, which is just mind blowing.
I love it. Oh my God. And I what a great way to kick off the record. Beauty and the Beast is like so much personality, so much. I mean, whenever I listen to this, whenever I after I listen to the album, it always sticks in my head, the whole smile at least. You can't say no to the beauty and the dude. I just love that.
Mm,
It's just so catchy. I love it.
yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. And I feel like Bowie's going for a little bit more of a almost like I don't know if anthemic is quite the right word, but he's definitely looking to project his voice a bit more in this album. Whereas on
Yes.
Low, he was even on the up-tempo songs, he was keeping it a little bit reined in, as it were.
Mm,
Whereas I think
right.
he's really going for it on things like Beauty and the Beast and especially Joe the Lion.
Go the Lion.
Like
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
absolutely starts howling on that song, doesn't he? It's wonderful.
Yes, I love it. I love it. He was a fortune teller. I love the
Yeah.
whole give him a couple drinks and he's a fortune teller. I love that. It kind of feels like it's telling a joke, Joe the Lion went to the bar. I'm not quite sure what it's about, but I always wondered if it was sounded like almost like he was telling a joke or something,
Yeah.
you know. But I love Joe the Beauty and the Beast and Joe the Lion. What a great 1-2 punch. And then right
Yeah.
into the title track. I mean,
I mean, Heroes. Wow.
yeah,
I mean, this is
come on.
probably the highlight of what Fripp does on this album
Yes, yes.
because but not just what Fripp does on this album, but this is just shows the genius of Tony Visconti as a producer, I think, this song in particular.
Hmm.
Because apparently what happened is that Fripp played three different lead guitar parts for this song,
Hmm.
expecting that Tony Visconti would use one of them.
Hmm. Right.
Tony Visconti ended up using all three of them and just
Yes.
blending them together and just, you know, the atmosphere that's created by these three different guitar lines going through this song. Um, yeah, I mean, it's
It's
genius.
incredible. It's incredible. And I think he's using an EBow, which creates this sort of drone with the guitar. This sort of he's not really picking it, he's using an EBow, and he has all three of those tracks with EBows, and it's just kind of all weaving. It's all just kind of going like this. It's
Mm,
just incredible, incredible.
yeah. And I mean,
Yeah.
one of Bowie's best lyrics too. This one isn't a particularly, it's not an inscrutable lyric. It's not a you know, puzzling cryptic lyric. It's for Bowie standards fairly straightforward, but it tells this beautiful story of sort of,
Hmm.
star-crossed lovers and all this sort of thing. And
Hmm.
Tony Visconti tells this story about where um, he'd gone outside the studio because the studio was right next to the Berlin Wall,
Hmm.
and he'd gone outside the studio with I think her name is Antonia Mars, who's like a backing vocalist on this album, and Tony Visconti and Antonia Mars were having a little bit of a fling,
Right.
and they went
Right.
outside the studio and they were having a bit of a snog. And Bowie saw this, and that's where the verse came for um, that they were standing by the wall and you know
Hmm.
all that sort of thing, and we kissed as though nothing would fall and all that sort of thing. So
Yes. Yes. Yes.
that was the inspiration
Apparently
for
they
it.
would meet for lunch every day or something like that in the same spot, and Bowie kept seeing this over and over again, and he wrote the
Mm.
song about it. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah,
Very,
but
very cool. And I love the vocal. I mean, the vocal where he
oh
starts very close to the mic, and then by the end he's screaming from another room essentially. And that was, I think that might have been Tony's idea to start really close to the mic and kind of quiet. And then every verse, if you notice, every verse he gets further away from the mic.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
apparently what I think if I remember correctly from an interview that I saw, what they did was they actually set up in the studio three microphones.
Oh,
One really
okay.
close to
Okay.
Bowie, one halfway down the room, and one right at the back. And they had
Hmm.
like on like different noise gates on them. So that
Okay.
like the ones further away would only be triggered when Bowie got louder.
Okay. Okay.
And that's how
Got
you
it.
end up when, he's doing that last verse and he's just again absolutely wailing. And it's triggering
What a
that
vocal.
microphone right up the back of the room, and you get that echo with it as well, and it's just wonderful.
Yeah, what an incredible vocal. Oh my God. Incredible.
Mm,
Unbelievable. Yeah.
yeah. And
So
then, I mean, on side two, we start to get some of the more ambient tracks again, but you've also got like the lovely tribute to Kraftwerk that is V2 Schneider.
love that. Love it. Love V2 Schneider.
Yeah.
And it's funny because apparently I read that he asked Kraftwerk to collaborate with him, and they said no or something to that effect. Like, we're too busy. We want to do our own thing or something.
Mm,
He wanted, yeah, he wanted to. So anyway, I guess this is his tribute to Kraftwerk.
yeah,
So
absolutely. I mean, it's not a particularly Kraftwerky sounding song,
no,
but just
no.
it has, it still has that kind of, German feel to it though. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
just calling it V2 Schneider after Florian Schneider,
Mm-hmm.
um, who is sadly missed. We lost him a few years ago.
Yes, yes,
But
yeah.
then you've got the um, ambient songs on this album getting into a bit of a world music kind of thing, which is something he would definitely follow up on when he gets into the next album. But
Yes.
especially like Moss Garden, you've got that um koto on it, the Japanese
Kyoto, yeah, yep,
koto.
yep. Mm,
And
yeah.
then um uh Newcoln. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of that. I only ever did a year of German at school, so
That's what I would
um
have said. New Coln, yeah.
but it has this weird, I always had trouble telling whether it was saxophone or guitar, but they're making
Hmm.
it sound like one of those sort of Turkish wind instruments with the production on
Yes.
it. And I'm pretty sure it is actually a saxophone,
I think
but
it's sax. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yep.
but yeah, so you get this sort of Japanese sounding song, and then you get this kind of Turkish sounding piece. But then it closes out with Secret Life of Arabia, which is, more a traditional song to close outside too.
Hmm. Yeah, which is interesting. That's the one thing that kind of throws me a little sideways is you're kind of getting into this whole the ambient side again, sort of like low, and then all of a sudden this Secret Life of Arabia kicks in and it's like it feels like something that should have been on side one. But but I think Secret Life of Arabia sounds like it could have been on Lodger. So it's sort of like it almost feels like once again the crumbs of this is what's coming next kind of thing.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
to your point, there's a little bit of world music happening on the instrumentals as well. So
Mm,
that's really cashed in a lot on Lodger. So,
yeah.
um,
I mean,
but yeah, I don't love the instrumentals as much. I do like them. I don't love
mm,
them as much as I love the low instrumentals.
yeah, I think that's a fair call.
Yeah,
Um, but still, and I mean, side one of this record, one of the best sides
lights out,
Bowie's ever created.
amazing, amazing, love it.
And then he would go on tour. He would go on the Isolar tour, Isolar 2 tour,
Hmm.
and play a lot of this music live. It would lead to the Stage live album, which is, I think, the better of the two live albums that came out in the 70s. I
Yes.
like it better than David Live.
Same here.
But
Same here.
for
Hmm.
that tour, he couldn't take Robert Fripp with him. Robert wasn't ready to start touring again just yet. Although he did
Yep.
play some shows with Peter Gabriel, like off stage. He played, but he was off stage, and he was credited under a pseudonym. I think he was called Dusty Rhodes or
Dusty
something like that.
Rhodes. Yes, Dusty Rhodes. Yes. Yes.
Um, but yeah, he wasn't quite ready to be doing the full touring thing just yet. So David Bowie ended up stealing a guitar player from Frank Zappa's band, a fella called
Yes.
Adrian Belew. And if you ever
Yes.
can find it on Adrian Belew's Facebook page, he tells this absolutely hilarious story about David Bowie recruiting him
Hmm.
while he was still touring with Frank Zappa. And Frank Zappa referring to Bowie as Captain Tom instead of Major Tom. Um,
Yeah, doesn't he say F you, Captain Tom,
yeah,
basically?
pretty
Because you're
much.
I know what you're doing. You're stealing my guitarist. Just get
Yeah.
out of here. Yeah.
I mean, Bowie was, he wasn't going to steal him mid-tour. He was waiting
Right.
until Frank, because apparently he got to talk to Adrian Belew during a show when Frank was doing his solo and Adrian would go off stage. And Bowie
Right.
was like, "Oh, I love your playing. Would you like to come and play in my band?" And Adrian's kind of like pointing at Zappa and going, "Well, I'm kind of working with this guy at the moment."
You have to
And
talk to him.
David's and David's like, "No, no, 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 no. After this tour's finished, then."
Right.
So they
Yeah.
toured in 1978. It was a very successful tour, and then they came back 1979 with this album, Lodger.
Yes.
So it's the gatefold picture.
Yes. I love what a great cover.
Yeah, with Bowie, he's got his like, broken nose and he looks like he's been run over by a car or something.
It looks like he's been beat up by somebody. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
like, what? Yeah.
And yeah, this is a different album again, you know. Yeah, you've got another picture in the on the insert on the record.
Yes. Yep.
You got the same
Yep.
picture but with like other backgrounds and you know.
Where, here it is. Yeah. Yes. I have the vinyl as well. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So
So,
he changes things up again on this album. You don't have any of the ambient pieces on this one. It's all songs.
right. Right. Yep.
And Eno is much more involved in the writing on this album. He gets writing credits on about seven of the 10 songs on the album, I think. And
Yes.
but at the same time, apparently Bowie and Eno were starting to butt heads a little bit by this stage. And it's
Yes. That's what I've
interesting to
read as
note that
well. Yep.
after this album, Bowie and Eno wouldn't work together again for another 16 years until
Wow.
Outside came out in 1995, which I love Outside. I think that's like a really underrated album in the Bowie catalog.
Hmm.
It
Yes.
made my Bowie top 10 when I did that a few years back. But yeah, this is a different album. As I say, it's all songs with, proper lyrics and that sort of thing. Although a lot of these lyrics are really, really sort of out there. He was doing a lot of
Yeah.
cut and paste kind of thing with his lyrics
Hmm.
by this stage. And as we said, you know, following on from a few of the tracks on Heroes, he's getting into a lot of world music with this album.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Apparently he had traveled to Africa with his son or something like that. He had done some travel right before, and maybe it had to do with the tour as well. I don't know. But he was doing some traveling right before this, and I guess he was inspired by the travel.
Yeah.
Um, so there's a lot of travel themes on the in the lyrics. But to your point, a lot of them they're kind of strange. They're kind of strange lyrics, but and you can tell that they're trying. You kind of wonder, this is my take on Lodger. It's almost like, okay, we did those two records, and Bowie's known as being very restless and
Mm.
very, just okay, we already okay, we did that. Let's do something else, And I could see that, they did two albums that were fairly similar to each other. And I'm sure by this time it was like, okay, we're using the same people again. Eno's involved again. Are we just going to do the same record again? Let's not do that. Let's do something different. So they're trying to, and I believe from what I understand that took out his cards, his what are they called?
Oh yeah,
Uh,
the oblique strategies.
yes, thank you. Oblique strategy cards where, it's like they said it's almost like uh, a combination of like Monopoly chance cards, and I mean it basically when you pulled a card it would say like, okay, play this song backwards, or
Hmm.
everybody switch instruments, or it was just something to like make you do things differently. And so they
Yeah,
started pulling those cards for this album, and you can tell because it's like there's a lot of stuff that goes in weird directions on this record, you know.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, great songs though. There's a lot of really, really good songs. And again, even though this album doesn't sound very commercial, there are still certain songs on here that ended up being quite successful, either as singles or just as radio hits. Songs like DJ and Boys Keep Swinging and Look Back in Anger, you
Mhm.
know.
Yeah, yeah. DJ, I remember hearing DJ quite a bit. I mean, it had a video and everything. So, um,
Mm,
and again, that song sticks in my head as well. The whole "I am a DJ, I am what I play."
yeah.
It's very hooky. There's a lot of hooky songs on this record.
Yeah, absolutely. And you got
Yeah.
like Adrian Belew on certain of these tracks, doing that stuff that only Adrian Belew seems to be able to do. Those
Yes.
strange sounds that he would get with his guitars and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I
And
mean, I
yeah.
I love Adrian Belew because he's worked with some, incredible people. Frank Zappa, David Bowie, Talking Heads, King Crimson, you know,
Oh,
and then he's
he
played on
yeah.
records like Graceland by Paul Simon. He's worked with Laurie Anderson, who's one of my favorite artists.
Mhm.
He's just done so much. And his solo records are really, really good too.
I was just gonna say that he's got some great solo records too. If you ever want to look into his solo career, please, there's a lot of great stuff in there. And it's a little more, it's more straightforward than you would think. I mean, you think of Baloo, you think of all these crazy stuff he does on guitar, but then he does these really straightforward solo records that are like almost Beatlesque at times.
Mm.
Um, you know, but I had read, I don't, did you hear this? That apparently there were a couple times where they would say they wouldn't let him listen to the track or something, and
Yeah.
they'd say, go in and solo. You're not gonna listen to the track. Just go ahead and play something. I was like, he's like, oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, and he's probably the only guitarist who could pull that off because he would do these, just great sound effects and that sort of thing on his guitar.
Yeah.
And that would end up fitting quite well into these songs. I mean, some of them, as you say, are quite accessible. Then you've got songs that are absolutely not accessible. And I'm thinking of a song like African Night Flight. It's just,
Yes. Yeah.
it's such a bizarre song. It's got this sort of tumbling, quirky rhythm and Bowie mumbling these weird, weird lyrics. Um, you know, always, seems like another day I could fly into the eye of God on high. And, you know, it's just bizarre stuff. But I really, really, that's one of my favorite songs on the album, actually, African Night
Isn't that
Flight.
one of these days, got to get a word
Yes.
through? Yes, yes. And then he does the chanting at the end. I. He does
Yes.
chanting. Yeah, it's a very bizarre song. But it's cool. But it's great. It's so Bowie. It's so cool. Like in a way you love it because it's so different.
Yeah. And I love on this song, Eno is credited with prepared piano and cricket menace.
Okay, okay.
So I'm guessing that's some of the just odd sounds that, again, much like on Low, you get a couple of songs which have got these almost, sort of insecty kind of sounds in the background and that sort of
Mhm.
thing. So
And then say things like Yasasin.
yeah.
The whole I'm not a moody guy. He's singing very
Mm.
strangely, and but I love, again, I love it, but it's not commercial in the slightest.
Yeah. And on the like some of these first three songs on this album, like Fantastic Voyage, African Night Flight, Move On, vocally, I feel like he's channeling Iggy Pop a little bit, singing
Yes.
in that
Yes.
much lower register. And
Yeah. Yep.
I definitely get, you know, and there's an Iggy Pop connection on the last song too, Red Money, because the backing track for Red Money was originally the backing track for the song Sister Midnight
Yes.
on, is it on The Idiot? Yeah.
I think that's on the Idiot. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then they added a few extra instruments and stuff, and Bowie wrote a new sort of lyric and melody on top of it. But
Yeah. Yeah. Iggy is calling Sister Midnight.
yeah.
And then Bowie does the red money. So yeah,
Mm,
but you're right. It's the same exact backing track.
yeah. Also, I wonder if on a song like Repetition, even though Repetition is credited entirely to Bowie writing wise, I get a feeling that Eno was influencing that track in as much as I get a bit of a early Talking Heads vibe from that song.
Yeah,
I don't know
I
if
can
you
hear
get the
that.
same thing,
Yeah, I could hear that. Yes, for sure. Yep. Yep.
but what are your overall thoughts on this record as far as, the differences and the similarities with the rest of the Berlin trilogy and all that sort of thing?
It's tough. I would say that it's my first impressions back in the day when I first heard this, I definitely felt like it was a step down from the other two. I felt like it was sort of a PS, but it's grown on me over the years. The stuff that we were talking about, some of the quirkiness of it is has kind of grown on me a lot. And so it's kind of grown in estimation for me over the years. I still think that the mix is not very good. It's
Mm,
pretty muddy. It's pretty muddy mix compared to Heroes and Low. It just seems like it's not the same. They were in a different studio, as you mentioned earlier. They were at
mm.
Mountain Studios
Yeah,
and
in
and
Montreux, yeah.
Montreux, and it just I don't know, something they didn't get a great sound in that studio or something. I don't know what it was, but it to the point where Visconti actually remixed it in 2017 for the box set of New Career in a New Town. And it's interesting if you listen to the remix, he did made a lot of changes, and it's actually that does sound more dynamic. But that being said, staying away from the whole production thing, um, I do love the eclecticism of it. I mean, it's so all over the map
Mm,
that it's admirable. It's one of those where you're like, wow, this is again at this time in his career, Bowie was just going. He was doing what he wanted. He wanted to make great music, and he wanted to do it his way, and he wanted to create art, and he succeeded. You know, he did. He I love this chapter of his career because he was just going for, and he was influenced by so many different things. It was, krautrock, it was Eno, it was, you know um it, you know any like all these different things. What was the other thing I was trying to think
like
of? Yeah,
world music.
world music, yeah. So there's all these different influences kind of coming in to him, and he was processing them all on as much as he could. And
Yeah.
so, but that being said, I do think that this album, you could say that it lacks focus a little bit. I don't know. I'm all over the place with this review, but I do like that it's eclectic, but it is kind of all over the place, and
Mm,
sometimes I feel like it loses its center like a little bit.
yeah.
That's my
That's
take.
that's what I would kind of say about this record too, is it is eclectic, which is admirable, but it's possibly a little unfocused.
Yeah, yeah,
And you know, whereas I think Low and Heroes are very, very well focused records.
right.
They knew exactly what they were doing. With this one, it does have a little bit of a feel of let's throw everything at the wall and see what sticks.
Yes, yes, it's
You know,
exactly.
and I
Yes,
think, Bowie would, again, he was always restless and he would go on to make Scary Monsters after this album. Eno would be gone by that stage, but Tony Visconti was still producing. Robert Fripp would be back. But most importantly, with Scary Monsters album, apparently Bowie did much more detailed and precise demos of the songs before they went in and recorded them. Whereas a lot
yeah.
of this was sort of seat of the pants, made up in the studio as they went along, kind of thing.
On the spot, yeah, on the spot
Mm,
type of thing. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that I had read that again to your point that there were tensions between Eno and Bowie by this stage. I think that Bowie left a little bit early, like he didn't even stay
mm,
for the very end of the record. I don't think. I think he was kind of gone. I think I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure about that, but I thought I read that somewhere that because he was like they were having problems. There was the tension, and he wasn't having fun anymore. I mean, he finished the vocals obviously, but He
Yeah.
didn't stay for like the mix or anything. He left.
Mm.
And I was thinking, I just had this thought as you were talking about scary monsters. Would it be fair to say, would you agree or disagree that it almost feels like Scary Monsters is a more focused version of this?
Yeah, kinda. Um,
Maybe? I don't know.
yeah, absolutely. I think Scary Monsters is definitely more focused. It's very laser focused, in fact.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
it's very song oriented, but it's not the commercial record that Let's Dance would be. It's
No, it's
still
not super
weird and
commercial
out
either.
there.
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, because I hear that a lot. Some people say, oh, Bowie went commercial with Scary Monsters. And I'm like, what? Have you
No, he
listened to this
didn't.
record? I mean,
No.
maybe they've just listened to Ashes and that's all they've heard. But
Yeah.
yeah,
But even
almost,
Ashes to Ashes is a weird single, right? It's even
mm,
that's kind of a strange single. I mean, I love it, but it's not their straight ahead single,
mm.
you know?
So, so there you have it. That is the Berlin trilogy. And as I said when we started the show, we're going to give a 3-2-1 of how we like these albums the best. So, Tom, what is your number three, your number two, and your number one, and who, yeah, so who ultimately wins this album battle for you?
Well, it might be somewhat obvious from my comments earlier, but I am going to say that number three for me would be Lodger. I have to go with my heart as much as I want to put this higher, and I still think this is an excellent record. Don't get me wrong, I still think it's very
Mm,
good. But in this battle, it comes in number three because it's just to our, as we discussed, it's a little unfocused. I don't love the production. I think the production could have been way better. And I do think that you can hear the tension happening on this record. There's a little bit of like, I love that your comment of let's throw everything at the wall. It's what it feels like.
mm,
And as much as sometimes I like certain songs on this, I feel like as a listening experience, it's not as focused and it's not as brilliant. Um, Coming in at number two would be Heroes. And this is, believe me, this is a very tight battle between the top two because I mean, literally, I think both of these records, I'll be honest, I'll say both of them are five-star records. I love both of them to death. I think that each record has its super, super strengths. And but to me, I would say I was thinking about this earlier today that the original the original vision when he came in and had this original vision of this is what I'm going to do, it's like the undiluted straight ahead version of this, and that's low. I don't know
yeah,
if I'm explaining myself that well, but that's the feeling. It's like the unfiltered original
mm,
vision. You know what I mean? And it's so strong. When I listen to this record, it just always hits me every time.
yeah,
It's a very strong record. So this is my number one.
yeah. No, look, I'm going to tell you, Tom, I'm in 100% agreement with you on all of that. My number three is Lodger. I love this
Mhm.
album. I think it's a really good album. Did not make my top 10 Bowie albums because Bowie has such a strong catalog.
Yes, yes.
He's got 26 albums, 28 if you include the two Tin Machine albums. So there's a
Yeah.
lot to choose from in his catalog. If this is
Mhm.
not in my top 10, it's just outside it. Only
Just missed.
just.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and my number two, Heroes. I mean, this is a phenomenal record. This absolutely did make my top 10.
Yeah.
Um, you know, just as you say, it's maybe not quite as pure a version of what we got on my number one, which is Low.
Hmm.
This is the original. This is, what sells it for me? I said it when we were talking about this record. The drum sound on this record, I love so, so much. I wish
Yes.
they'd
Yeah.
kept using that drum sound. But yeah, I love the fact that this album is very neatly sort of packaged on a side one, side two that are very different from each other.
Mhm.
You can't really call side one accessible. It's still quite different and strange,
Right.
but it's definitely, your up tempo side, your rock and roll side, as it were, and then your
Yeah.
ambient side.
Right.
And Low is a fabulous, fabulous record. I think not only did that one make my top 10 Bowie albums, pretty sure it was in my top five. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
just a phenomenal record. So,
yeah,
there you have
yeah.
it. That is our David Bowie Berlin Trilogy album battle. Tom, thank you so much for doing this show. Always a pleasure to have you on the channel.
My pleasure. Thanks again for having me. This was a ball. This was a lot of fun. Thank you.
To my viewers, if you're not already subscribed to Curlessmania, please go and do yourself a favor and fix that right now and go and subscribe. I will leave a link in the description. He does a lot of great content, a lot of album battles. I've been lucky enough to do a couple of those with him, and hopefully I'll have one or two more coming up this year
Oh
because
yeah.
I always love doing them. But he has a lot of great other music content on that channel as well, so please do go check it out. Please do like, share, and subscribe here. It really does help the channel out. If you're new to the channel, please go and have a look at some of my other videos. I have everything playlisted, so if you want to see some of my other special episodes, I have a playlist for those. If you want to see some of my studio albums ranked, like my David Bowie top 10, I have a playlist for those. And if you want to see my appearances on other people's channels, like the aforementioned Curlessmania, I also have a playlist for those. If you want to follow me on social media, I'm at bicyclelegs on Instagram, Twitter, and a bunch of other places. I also have a dedicated Bicycle Legs Facebook page. Links are all in the doobly-doo. Please do give those all a follow and join in the conversation. I'd really love to have you there. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.